Hello everyone, my name is Garvin and I read things and clatter on about them on the internet for your entertainment. Here we are at the final European Merfolk video, which will bring our monumental world tour of mermaid myths to a close. Although I will be talking about twin-tailed merfolk next week and tentacled merfolk the week after that, so we're not quite to the bottom of this deep pool just yet. Just to note, this truly deep and wide topic was chosen by my ever-wise patrons, whose ranks you can join for as little as $1 a month by clicking on the link in the description below. You can have the power to decide what kind of videos are made on this channel. If you'd rather just leave a one-time donation, there's also a link to my Ko-fi site. If you do leave a one-time donation, please feel free to leave a request on that site if you'd have something you'd like me to cover in the future. With all that said, let's get to the merfolk, right? A unique belief I found in Southern European lore is a belief in air-breathing merfolk, which would be support for one of my patrons' beliefs that mermaids should be considered sea mammals. One example of this is the story of a young merman named Cola Pesce, which I found out might be an Italian word for fish, so that seems a little on the nose to me. Especially since it seems he was a human who was just born part fish for no reason, since the story says he's from the city of Torre Faro. He worked as a diver and protected the nets of fishermen in the area until the local king asked him to dive to the bottom of the sea and, well, he never came back. Maybe he found one of those air-filled fairy realms that we keep running into in these stories beneath the sea. I would certainly like to believe so rather than him drowning alone in the cold and dark, but that's just me. There's another story about a sailor who became friends with a mermaid and eventually made a bet with her that she couldn't reach the bottom of the sea and retrieve a ring that had been dropped. She said she'd give it a shot and to wait half an hour, but if he saw blood rise to the surface, that meant she wasn't coming back on account of being dead. And unfortunately, that is what happened. I'm gonna be honest, the sailor doesn't seem like a very good friend in this story. If I made a bet with someone, they're like, oh yeah, hang out for half an hour, and if I don't come back, I'm dead, I would be like, hey, maybe this bet was a little too much, let's talk about this. Again, just me talking here. Now, the obsession with romance does continue here in Southern Europe, with a pair of stories, one from Portugal and another from Italy. The story from Portugal goes like this. A knight from Villaxen was walking one day by the sea when he slipped and fell in. His armor was so heavy he couldn't swim, and he was just about to drown when a mermaid appeared and rescued him. Well, things proceeded, they both fell in love, and their relationship lasted for some time, during which they had 4 children. The knight, when his children were of a certain age, asked the mermaid to let him take them to land so he could educate them in the arts of knighthood. There was some back and forth, and unhappily the mother gave her consent, but she imposed the following condition. From each generation born of her descendants, the mermaid would reserve a boy for herself, and that boy would be marked with blue eyes and scales on his thighs. That boy was to be returned to her at the sea. The knight accepted, but had no intention of fulfilling this promise, which seems against the whole oath you have to swear as a knight, but what do I know? I mean, I suppose this could have just been a plot on his part to get away from the mermaid. However, generation after generation of beautiful boys were born with blue eyes and scales on their thighs, and it didn't matter who they married or what they did, this feature would emerge again and again, and no doctor they ever went to could diagnose this rare illness. The mermaid and the knight were never heard of again, but those with the surname of Marino, which was adopted by the children of this knight, learned to beware of the sea because misfortune would always accompany them and every generation would lose at least one of their sons to the sea. The Italian story is from the city of Venice, and if there was a city in Italy with a mermaid myth, you would think it'd be Venice, right? Well, this story goes that a young fisherman named Oreo was pulling in his nets late one night when he heard a young lady's voice begging for her freedom. Entangled in his nets was the beautiful mermaid named Melusine. Well, the two fell in love, and Oreo asked her to marry him, and she agreed on the condition that he could not see her on Saturdays until after the wedding. We all have heard this one before. Oreo holds out all of 3 weeks before breaking this promise, which means he was outdone by Sleepy Tony. Dude, come on. Well, he barges in on Saturday and finds out that his lady love turns into a giant sea serpent, because despite what some people in my comment sections will tell you, there are aquatic snakes. They count. Oreo, unlike every other dude in these stories, decides he does not care. His particular field was barren of give a crap on this. And he told his mermaid that he still wanted to marry her, which broke her curse and turned her into a full human. They lived happily together as man and wife and had 3 children until sadly a plague struck and killed her. Oreo was grief-stricken and refused to remarry, which meant that not only was he laboring under a heavy load of grief, but he also had to work full-time to feed his kids, be their dad, and try and keep the house, which is a lot to ask of any person, never mind a person that's likely struggling under depression at this point. But it seems that the house was clean and kept tidy until Oreo came home one day, found a giant snake in the kitchen, and panicking for the safety of his children, killed it. When the house stopped being cleaned, Oreo realized he had killed the last remaining part of Melusine, who had reached out from beyond the grave to help him. The story ends on that rather sad note, but in modern-day Venice, it's said you can visit their home, which is called the Sodo Pratico dei Preti, where you'll find a little red heart-shaped rock in the wall, and it is claimed that couples who touch it together will stay in love, and single people who touch it will find true love in a year. So if you're in Venice and you try this out, let me know how it goes, okay? We find mermaid myths in the south of Italy as well, with Naples claiming its origin with one of the sirens that tried to lure Odysseus to his death. Now, while sirens were originally bird-women hybrids instead of fish-women hybrids, they did gradually change into mermaid-like creatures over time in the folklore, so I'm counting this. In this case, the siren Parthenope was said to have died here, and the city grew from her ashes. Another version of the story is that Parthenope and a centaur named Vesuvius fell in love, and in a fit of jealousy, Zeus turned her into the city and Vesuvius into a volcano. Which, yeah, sounds like Zeus, honestly. Next up is a Greek version of a story that I've run into more than a few times during my research, but this is the best version so far if you ask me. It starts with a sea captain who's out and about on his fishing boat when all of a sudden it just stops dead in the water and starts sinking. In a panic, he looks over the side, and there's a mermaid who has grabbed a hold of his boat and is pulling it under the waves. The captain, freaking out, asks what he has done to offend the mermaid that she would do this to him, and her response is, nothing, but she's heard he doesn't have any kids and he wants kids. When he goes, yeah, I don't have kids, I would love kids, she goes, great, here's a bone, have your wife eat this and you will have a boy, but when he's 15, you have to hand him over to me. Your alternative is drowning right here. Whichever one you prefer, she says. The captain decides to take the option that doesn't involve immediate death, which, fair, and does what the mermaid tells him to do. he feeds the bone to his wife, and they have a son named Yannicus, which, hey, unlike a number of other stories, this one actually names its main character. Take note of that, rest of Europe. Y'all know who you are. Unlike the parents in the Irish story I told a couple of videos back, these two don't mourn their son, but once he turns 15, they take him out to the seashore and basically abandon him to his death. Wow, makes Tobin's parents look like Parents of the Year material, doesn't it? Well, Yannicus unwittingly foils the mermaid and his parents by figuring out that he's been abandoned and that he's going to head inland. On his way in, he finds a pair of ants fighting over a dead worm, and he cuts it in half with his pocket knife for them to share. The ants are so pleased by this, they grant him the ability to change into an ant. He continues on and finds two eagles fighting over a dead rabbit, and cuts that in half so that the eagles can both have rabbit. They're so happy with this, they grant him the ability to turn into an eagle. Lastly, he runs into a pair of lions. Now, I will say there are at least historical records and fossil evidence of lions once inhabiting Greece, so this doesn't bother me so much. Yannicus is a brave boy, so he walks right up to these two lions fighting over a deer carcass and just chops the deer right in half. And the lions are so pleased with this, they grant him the ability to change into a lion. Could you imagine living in a world where doing animals a favor means that they could grant you the ability to change into their shape? I mean, I think it'd be great if I could turn into a dog, because then maybe I could explain to my pup why I want him to stay away from the hot stove, as well as probably have more fun playing puppy games with him, but that's just me. What kind of animal would you want to turn into? Let me know in the comments. Well, Yannicus goes his way until he meets a bunch of shepherds who have all had their ears notched and their noses slit. He's alarmed by this, and they tell him the local princess, who is black. Now, this is believable since, due to the Ottoman conquest of Greece, along with general interactions among the Mediterranean, there have been, people of African descent showing up in Greece and vice versa, so I'm not going to sweat it. Well, this princess wants to bathe in warm milk to lighten her skin. This is a existing prejudice called colorism. It's separate from racism, and you find it not just in the West, but in the Middle East, in North Africa, as well as parts of Asia. It's basically the belief that paler skin is prettier. But because the shepherds have to keep their flocks so far away, due to royal decree, and they can't just bring the sheep closer, by the time the milk gets to her, it's gone cold, so she has them maimed in punishment. Honestly, this princess doesn't seem very nice to me. Yannicus decides he's going to help the shepherds out by turning into an eagle and flying the milk over. And the princess is very impressed by this, and after some time of Yannicus being her personal milkman, the princess and our hero fall in love, and he reveals to her how he can change into different animals, and he uses these forms, among other ways, by turning into an ant to sneak into her room and spend the night with her, which, wow, didn't see that one coming, honestly. This raises more issues than Yannicus's questionable taste in women, in my opinion, because her father, the king, was trying to set her up with a local prince, but she tells him Yannicus is the only dude she's marrying, and if she tries to marry him to the prince, things are going to go bad. So he relents, and I'm going to regard this as a mistake, because the other kingdom promptly declares war, and I'm sitting here going, great, thanks princess, not only do you maim people for not being faster than the speed of cooling milk, but you've started a war and you're gonna get how many people killed so you can be with this dude? Yannicus, however, shows some moral responsibility. He volunteers to fight, but he doesn't ask for any armor, just a rusty old sword. Well, everyone thinks he's crazy or suicidal until he charges the enemy army and turns into a lion. Can you imagine being the average trooper in the enemy army? You're marching along, you're having to fight a war because your prince is butthurt that a princess turned him down, and the next minute there's this dude charging you with a rusty sword, and you're like, what's even going on? And then suddenly a lion is tearing off your face. Well, the enemy army breaks because, surprise lion, and Yannicus turns back into a man, and he is just covered head to toe in blood because he went to town. And I feel bad for the troopers on the other side. They did not sign up for this. Well, Yannicus is feeling sticky, so he goes to have a wash, and the best place to do that is the sea, which is where everything goes south from, because apparently the mermaid's been waiting this whole time, and the minute he walks into the water, she just grabs him and swallows him whole in front of everyone. Yikes. Although, now that I think about it, this is a lot of trouble to go through for a single meal. I mean, would you be into a delivery service that takes more than 15 years to get your meal to you? Not a time frame I would want for my pizza. The princess is understandably distraught and distressed seeing the love of her life swallowed whole by a mythological creature. But she takes a deep breath and comes up with a plan. And she has her father build her a tower in the sea and get her a pair of golden apples. Then she goes out to a balcony where she's sure the mermaid can see her, and starts playing with the gold apples, making sure they can catch the light so the mermaid can see how shiny they are. The mermaid shows up and says, hey, you don't need 3 apples, let me have one. And the princess goes, I suppose I could give you 1 apple, but I want to see my husband from the neck up. And the mermaid feels this is fair and obliges, which makes me wonder just how far she can unhinge her jaw, because that is a freaky image. The next day, she comes out with the 2 apples she has left, starts playing with them, making sure that they can catch the light, and the mermaid sees how shiny they are, and sure enough, the mermaid comes up and goes, listen, you don't need 2 apples, let me have 1. And the princess is like, yeah, I suppose I really don't need 2 golden apples, but I want to see my husband from the waist up. And the mermaid goes, yeah, sure, and just lets Yannicus come up out of her mouth from the waist up, which leads me to wonder, just how big is this mermaid? Is she like, killer whale size or something? Because that would seem to fit better than her being human size. I'm overthinking this, sorry. For the last apple, the princess demands that the mermaid let her see her husband's entire body, from the soles of his feet to the top of her head. And the mermaid, perhaps having a bit of collector's mania, obliges, and Yannicus, realizing that he is completely in the air, promptly turns into an eagle and just gets out of there. The princess flees, with the mermaid tearing down the tower in rage. But the princess doesn't care because she's reunited with her husband, and they live happily ever after. Now, I found a lot of stories in Southern European fairy tales and folklore where mermaids played very small roles. And I decided to omit most of them for lack of time and the fact that the mermaids were really big parts. But I would like to give an example of these stories, so please allow me to present you the story of the Yellow Dwarf. This story begins with a queen who lost her husband and all of her children except for her youngest and prettiest daughter. And because of this, the child was named Tut-Bel. Tut-Bel was a very willful lady with a high opinion of herself because, honestly, her mother had spoiled her due to the fact that she was her only remaining child. Tutabel, though, was very beautiful and had no less than 20 kings vying for her hand, but rarely did she spare them even a word of kindness. She preferred to hunt and ride with her ladies-in-waiting and to just range free across the countryside. And this left the queen beginning to worry about what would happen after she passed away. Who was going to look after her kingdom? Who was going to look after her daughter and keep her from being a prize to be won in a war that would doubtlessly be fought on her kingdom? So she decided to go to the Fairy of the Desert, who is rumored to be very wise, and ask for help. Now, this fairy was guarded by a small army of lions, but these were very abnormal lions, because they had red, shell-like skin, 8 legs, and 2 heads with 4 rows of teeth each. I gotta admit, I'm wondering why no one has made these lions into a game monster. Tell you what, folks, give me 15 likes on this video, and I will make a bonus video where I stat these lions up for D&D. Now, there is a secret to getting past this army of lions, and that is to give them cakes made of sugar candy, millet seed, and crocodile eggs. I asked a number of folks who are very good cooks if it was possible to make a cake like this, and they said yes, but it's entirely possible you're going to get a very dense, like, loaf-like cake here, so maybe don't try this at home. The queen, however, knew the recipe for these cakes, so she made them herself, and she set off to the Fairy of the Desert. Now, on the way to the Fairy of the Desert, she came to a field with a single orange tree, and this field was just carpeted in beautiful flowers, and everything smelled so nice and was so comfy, and she was royalty. She wasn't used to walking, so she was tired, so she laid down to just take a little nap, and she was awoken by the roaring of the lions. In a panic, she looked over to her basket, and someone had stolen her cakes. Panicking, she began to weep, and that's when our villain makes himself known. He was only as tall as a man's arm is long. His skin was bright yellow, and he was hideous to behold. He showed up in the tree, idly smacking on an orange, and after taunting the queen with her eminent denies, made her an offer. Let him marry the princess, her only daughter, or die. The queen went back and forth of this until she could see the lions coming over the hills at her, and in a panic agreed. The yellow dwarf used his magic to open up the orange tree and pull her inside, where there was a small fairy realm made up of a large pond and a very rude hut, where he promised that he would feed the princess only the best, fattest frogs and let her sleep on the finest of reeds. This drove the queen to utter despair, and she passed out, and without knowing how, she woke up in her own bed, but she was deeply miserable and would not tell anyone why, least of all her daughter. To be fair, how would you tell her that? Now, the princess was a spoiled, willful girl, but she wasn't that terrible a person. She did love and care for her mother, and she was very distressed to see her mother so miserable. So she decided the best solution she could think of was to go to the Fairy of the Desert, who was rumored to be very wise, and see what she could do to cheer her mother up. She also knew the secret and made her own cakes, and walked out, came to the same beautiful field with that orange tree and those flowers, and she just had to stop and put down her basket and pick some flowers. After she had wandered about picking the most beautiful flowers for a bit, the lion showed up. She ran to her basket, but her cake was gone. And who should appear but the dwarf, demanding that she marry him or die. not having a lot of options, she agrees, and once she gets a good look at this guy, she kind of passes out from the horror. However, Tortabella is no simpleton. When she wakes up, she promptly hatches a plan. See, the dwarf's gonna have to come get her, and she's got 20 kings vying for her hand. So obviously, the solution here is to pick a king, marry him, and have this king and his army protect her from the dwarf. Now, I'll admit this plan is a little devious, but I'm actually on her side here, because if you've seen any of my other videos, I think you've picked up I'm not a fan of marriage by blackmail. Plus, I think this game is rigged, and soon you'll see even more evidence why I think that. Now, Tortabella decides to marry the king of the gold mines. This king doesn't get a name, he's just the king of the gold mines. And it turns out, not only is he very strong, insanely rich, and has a great army, but he's also considerate, patient, intelligent, and artistically gifted. This leads to the princess falling in love with the dude once she got to know him, which kind of makes me wonder, hey, what if you hadn't been so stuck up and you just spent some time with these kings to see if any of them were worth your time? But lost opportunities, I guess. Well, seeing her daughter pick a suitor and agree to get married really cheers her mother up. So the wedding proceeds as planned, but during the wedding, an old woman gate crashes with a pair of giant turkeys dragging a giant box. I just want everyone to imagine some elderly woman being followed with a pair of man-sized turkeys, and they're just dragging a giant box by chains. I really love that image. Well, the old lady announces she is the fairy of the desert, and the yellow dwarf is her best friend, and she will not let him be cheated. See, this is why I think the game is rigged. So, this fairy's best friend just happens to be the yellow dwarf, who happens to live in this enchanting little glade out right on the path to her home, where anyone walking past is going to be bewitched into stopping and then get attacked by the lions, and the dwarf just happens to be there and the cakes are missing. The story doesn't tell us this, but this is 2 + 2, and 4 is they have rigged the game. Tell me I'm wrong. I dare you. Well, the box opens up, and out jumps the yellow dwarf riding a Spanish cat. I tried looking up Spanish cats, but I couldn't find anything, so I'm just assuming at this time and place Spanish cats were like Maine Coons and considered the biggest, strongest, scariest domestic cat. And we'll just keep moving here. Well, the queen and the princess both turn to each other and basically go, "Oh no, what did you do?" And the truth comes out. But the king of the gold mines doesn't care. He ain't having this. He is ready to throw down. He challenges the dwarf to go mano el mano, because he will defend his bride and her right to choose a husband. And the dwarf is like, cool, and promptly sicks the turkeys on the king. Only these turkeys swell up to dragon size and start breathing fire. Oh, this is so ridiculous. Listen, I love this ridiculousness so much that if this video gets 20 likes, I will stat giant fire-breathing turkeys right after the lions. Go ahead, guys. Tell me you don't want to see that. Click that like button so you can get that video. Moving on. In this grand melee, the princess is stabbed in the side by the fairy of the desert wielding an iron spear and falls to the ground. The king of the gold mines turns, seeing his lady love falls, and leaps to her side, but this opens him up and he is struck down by the yellow dwarf, who then carries off the princess. Meanwhile, the fairy of the desert decides she likes the look of the king, and she carries him off for herself. The Fairy of the Desert chains up the King of the Gold Mines, but like I said, he's an intelligent man, and he's a smooth talker, and he talks to her and convinces her that he could be persuaded to love her, but not if he's chained up and kept in a dank, dark dungeon. This is not an environment conducive to romance. And the Fairy of the Desert concedes he has a point and lets him free. And over a couple of days, through that silver tongue, he gets himself more and more liberty until he's allowed out of the castle, only to find himself in an island in the middle of nowhere. And he sits down by the seaside and he begins to weep because his beloved is he knows not where and being forced to marry the Yellow Dwarf. And here's where the mermaid finally comes into the story, because she pops out of the ocean. She turns to the king and goes, "Listen, I've seen this whole thing, and this is rotten as hell, and I'm not going to take it." She is going to aid the king. First, she creates a decoy made out of sea rushes, enchanted to look like the king. Then, she gives him an enchanted diamond sword, because we're in Minecraft now, I guess, and takes him to where the princess is being held. The king is all for this, and when they leave, the Fairy of the Desert finds the duplicate and believes the king dead, so she calls all of her fairy friends over to build him a grand mausoleum. Meanwhile, the king makes his way to the princess. As soon as he touches off of land, he is attacked by 4 Sphinx, but that enchanted diamond sword just slices them apart like they're made of butter. He marches forward without any hesitation. Dragons swoop down to attack him, but the magic of the sword renders him immune to their flames, and he's able to just swat, 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 cut them all down. So the Yellow Dwarf decides to resort to underhanded methods, sending 24 beautiful nymphs to show up and tempt him to stop. Just relax, sit down for a minute, smell some flowers, because we all know how smelling flowers has turned out in this story so far. But the mermaid reaches out, contacts the King of the Gold Mines and says, "No, this is a trap. Show no mercy." So the king mows through 24 nymphs with the sword, which is, wow. This fairy tale takes no prisoners. How come we didn't get this as kids? That's what I want to know. So the king arrives to the princess's prison, and the minute he sees the princess, he makes the fatal mistake of dropping the sword and picking her up, because she is still recovering from that deep wound the Fairy of the Desert gave her. The Yellow Dwarf was hiding, though, and the minute the king dropped the sword, he grabs it and holds them at sword point to blackmail the princess again. The king's not having any of this. He goes right in for the fight, and the dwarf, in one strike with the diamond sword, slays him. Heartbroken, the princess throws herself on the king's body and also dies from a combination of exhaustion, grief, and her wounds. The Yellow Dwarf is actually okay with this, because he'd rather see the princess dead than with anyone else, which really just establishes how much of a rotten, creepy person he is. It's not his ugliness that makes him a terrible person, it's his actions, and his actions are pretty dang bad. The mermaid, in sorrow, is not able to do anything about this, but she works one last enchantment, turning the king and the princess into palm trees that grew intertwined and thus staying together forever. I'll admit that's kind of a sad note to end on, but tragedy has also been a reoccurring theme in mermaid lore, so I feel it's true to the mythology. Let me just say thank you for listening, and I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, or a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm, terror be on his name. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Big Steve, my biggest supporter. I could not pull this off without your support, big man. Next week, we will cover stories of twin-tailed mermaids, and I hope you'll join me there. But until then, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.